Hello, this is Muhammad Abdullahi, and this is my presentation on Ludwig van Beethoven, who I am arguing as a symbol of the Romantic movement, which was a movement based on the ideas of individualism and expressionism, of which Beethoven is a clear representation of. I'll be going over his history, the historical context, as well as the periods of musical challenge in Beethoven's work and their roots, which are all catalysts to explain my belief and argument of Beethoven as a symbol of Romanticism. So yeah, the title is Ludwig van Beethoven, the greatest classical composer and symbol of the Romantic movement by Muhammad Abdullahi. Okay, so to start off, the Romantic era, for historical context, was an era where there was radical change occurring all over Europe in many different sectors. Economically, there was an immediate impact from the Industrial Revolution during this time, which marked a period where there was a huge change from an agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacturing. People also moved to these bigger cities at the hands of the Industrial Revolution, and there was also a shift in thought socially, for example, in creative creation. Neoclassicism, which was a Western cultural movement in the decorative and visual arts, literature, theater, music, and architecture that drew inspiration from the art and cultural class or the culture of classic antiquity, was overthrown by ideas of individualism, realism, and expressionism. Individualism being emphasized as the intrinsic worth of the individual, realism, which argued for an accurate depiction of life and nature, and expressionism, which was a modernist movement in the beginning of the 20th century, arguing for the world to be depicted subjectively, distorting it through an artistic medium to evoke certain moods and emotions. All these ideals were expanded to new heights during this time period, and it also permeated within the musical thought as well. This era, Romanticism, was an artistic, literary, musical, and intellectual movement from the 1830s to the 1900s, where emotion and individualism took center stage. Musically, this meant that individuality and self-expression reigned supreme, and grandeur was in all forms. For example, orchestras were enormous, and instruments like pianos were reworked to project better in these more expensive buildings. A lot of musical characteristics we are familiar with in earlier musical eras were re-envisioned with more depth, complexity, and enrichment, and enriched through and through from tone color to tempo. Everything was used in varying degrees, such as harmonies being chromatic with sound modulation, to melodies peaking and evoking emotional feelings through varying irregularity and rhythm. Music seemed to be reaching a new crescendo. This is where Ludwig van Beethoven comes in. Born just at the right time to experience his musical era of individualism and expressionism, where his creativity and individuality could be practiced and even encouraged. He was born just near the dawn of the Romantic movement and the end of the Classical era, which, of course, the Romantic movement proceeded by. He was born roughly on December 16th, 1770, in the city of Bonn, in the Electorate of Cologne, a principality of the Holy Roman Empire. He was a part of a family of five, essentially. His two younger brothers, Caspar and Johann van Beethoven, his mother, Maria Magdalena, and his father, Johann van Beethoven. Ludwig was named after his grandfather, Kapellmeister Ludwig van Beethoven, who was Bonn's most prosperous and eminent musician, and was someone Beethoven really felt proud to be related to and looked up to as a role model in the field. His father, however, Johann, was a pretty bland court singer with a raging alcoholism that not only plagued him and his family for decades to come. This alcoholism led to Johann teaching young Ludwig through physical abuse day in and day out. He would get constant floggings with each mistake and was deprived at times of sleep and comfort. These draconian methods of teaching perhaps was a reason for Beethoven's talent. Ludwig van Beethoven's musical career and life can really be divided into three parts. His first period, which spans from the date of his birth in 1770 to about 1802, could be separated even further into two separate parts. The first part being his time in Bonn with the training of his father and other local musicians. Then the second in his departure to Vienna after impressing local nobility and composers with his talent, primarily the Elector of Cologne, Maximilian Franz, and Haydn, a notable composer or a notable Austrian composer who was visiting Bonn from Vienna at the time. After hearing Beethoven's work firsthand, he quickly realized his talent and urged the elector to send Beethoven to Vienna. In November of 1792, Beethoven made his treacherous trip to Vienna, where he began his studies with Haydn, and later on with multiple other notable composers. Here, he learned his craft at a much higher level and really soaked up all the knowledge and established himself as a pianist and composer, aided through stipends from his sponsor, Prince Karl von Lichnowsky, who also gave him a place to stay. During his early time in Vienna, he primarily was strengthening his confidence before composing his final first pieces by being a freelance teacher of the piano, and as a freelancer in creating musical pieces to support his living as well and get as much experience as possible. He was given the creative outlet to improve on his musical foundation and build the confidence again to compose without the stress of financial insecurity through the previously said sponsorship from Prince Karl and other benefactors. Among those was his symphony number one. Among the very first pieces in this early period was his Symphony Number One in C major, which premiered in 1800, which showed the impact that Haydn and composers like Mozart had on his musical influence. So it isn't too far off to say his allegiance to their models was prevalent in this piece. He made his own spin off their model, however, with a slower introduction with no definitive cadence, precise and intentional dynamic shadings, increased incorporation of little instruments, and long codas for other moments. This piece really symbolizes Beethoven's individualism and expressionism, whereby taking older models and adding his own genuine musical creativity, it really creates a piece that is entirely unique to his sound and to his own, encapsulating again what it means to be a composer in this romantic era. Beethoven's middle period, however, is perhaps, or at least in my opinion, to be his most interesting, as it was a time of great struggle for, it was an introduction of great struggle for Beethoven. His increase in popularity led him to achieve a position of power musically, widely considered at the time as the foremost German pianist and composer with a reputation that really preceded him. This led to him being able to have, for example, publishers compete tooth and nail for Beethoven's music, in which he let them bid amongst themselves at the benefit of an ever-increasing financial gain. He was also he was also known to compose very little compared to composers like Mozart, and often took great time and consideration when creating new pieces. And although at times he had certain deadlines to meet, due to his stature, he could simply not make them. It seemed as if everything was going really well. I mean, he had the financial freedom, status, and creative outlet to truly dive into his music and sound. But like the calm before a storm, a terrible realization would become a Beethoven. He was going deaf. His hearing loss, he found, was permanent, and as time goes on, he would lose more and more until he eventually just became absolutely deaf. Uh, a I like this line from the textbook where it said, "A deaf musician it was as unconceivable as a blind painter," and it was the reason why I like it is because it really highlighted the insanity and just absurdity of a composer and musician losing the one faculty that was pivotal in their role as a musician, their faculty of hearing. This, of course, made Beethoven extremely distraught and at a time even suicidal. The shift saw him performing less and less, and his compositions during this period were becoming more and more dramatic as well, and seemed to reflect the ongoing difficulties occurring in his day-to-day life. His music became increasingly dynamic, and through the use of unusual patterns, climaxes, and other techniques, it really made this period one of his most impactful. One such composition or piece that perfectly highlights his increasing drama in his music will be considered his most famous piece and one of my personal favorites, and is one of the reasons why I believe Beethoven is really the symbol of the Romantic era and arguably the face of classical music, and that would be his Symphony Number Five. And I love the textbook's part where he explains the importance of this piece as it is his musical projection of his resolution. I will grapple with fate, it shall not overcome me. He symbolizes his struggle for victory by passing from C minor to C major in a grand expansion of the move from chaos to light that he found in Haydn's piece creation. His first notes are so suspenseful and full of emotion, with an almost eerie resolution of the starting movements, and finally climaxing and ending just as impressively. Symphony number 5 incorporates exactly what it means to be a classical musician or having a classical piece in the height of the Romantic era. The last period was an era in Beethoven's music where the battle of his loss of his faculty of hearing became more and more profound, and as a direct consequence, he became increasingly isolated. His most important sponsor, as well, Prince Kinsky, also died during this period, which had reduced Beethoven's annuity, combined with hysteria from losing his hearing with this unfounded apprehension of poverty. It really took a toll on Beethoven's style. His style at this time could really just be described as one with a high degree of contrast. Beethoven's balanced this contrast in his late style with an emphasis on continuity. Within movements, he achieves continuity by intentionally blurring divisions between phrases or placing cadences on weak beats. He also emphasized continuity between movements, sometimes indicating that successive movements should be played without a pause in between, such as his piece, I don't know how to pronounce it, but his Ein de Femme Galibet, The Distant Beloved, Op. 98. So, in conclusion, Beethoven was a man whose music was highly celebrated during his time and for centuries to come, with his reputation as a hallmark of what it means to be an individual in European classical music. He's a summation of all the previous musical eras and their battle of individualism, and is a musician who clearly represents the ideology and classical history of European music. Thank you.